Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's happy Wednesday morning, but welcome to the Mic Drop Show, where we bring clarity and structure to real estate and financing. I'm Mike Morawski. I'm your host, and I'm here every Wednesday morning at 7:30 Pacific, 9:30 Central, where we take a closer look at the framework that actually protects investors in real estate investing. Hey, today we're not breaking down tactics. We're not walking through strategies. We're not giving you a checklist. We're doing something more important. We're actually identifying risk inside the financial advice most people repeat without thinking about it. Hey, there's a lot of dangerous assumptions out there in investing. You know what? I can raise my hand to that. That's for sure. Fallen into some of those traps in the past myself. But if it's popular, it must be safe, right? If everyone says it must be right, then of course it must be right. If it worked for somebody online, it should work for you too. That thinking is expensive. It costs you time, it costs you money. Financial advice spreads quickly because it's simple, emotional, and easy to repeat, not because it's structurally sound. We have to have structure in what we do. So, look, my role here isn't to teach you how to execute strategies, it's to help you see where the risks hide, where those hidden challenges show up. Because once you can see risk, you stop chasing all the noise that you hear. And a lot of times, a lot of things online are just noise. So let's walk through some of the most common financial narratives right now, not to argue with them, but to flag what people ignore. Let's talk about buy and hold forever. Sounds disciplined, right? Sounds patient, sounds intelligent, even. There's risks, you know, markets move, cycles shift, debt matures, regulations change. Holding without structure isn't discipline, it's passivity. And passivity under leverage becomes your greatest exposure. What should you do when you buy and hold long term? There's some options around that, but are you doing enough of the research to figure it out? Listen, I've met people that have buy and held the first piece of real estate they ever bought 30, 40 years down the road. And you know what? They've made it productive because they followed sound principles. Do you know what those sound principles are? The other another one is cash flow is king. This is repeated everywhere. Everybody talks about it. Don't do a deal without cash flow. The risk, cash flow can hide fragility in a deal. Short-term income doesn't guarantee long-term stability or success. Distributions don't equal durability. If you don't understand what supports that cash flow underneath the framework, you're renting false confidence for yourself. So make sure that when you're looking at the cash flow, you're looking at the framework around it. You know what? Math never lies. So don't get distorted by things that aren't true. Refinance and scale fast. This is another one, right? Let's refinance. Let's pull cash out. Let's scale our business fast. Hey, acceleration feels powerful. You ever been behind your car? Your car goes fast. You press on the gas. You take off. It feels powerful, right? But there's risks. You're stacking obligations on assumptions. You're compressing timelines. You're increasing sensitivity to interest rates and liquidity shifts. Hey, I know I scaled way too fast, built $100 million company in 30 months. And you know what? Crashed and burned as a result of it. But speed amplifies mistakes. You don't pay attention to things. Debt magnifies timing errors. So make sure you watch these things, build the framework around it. And if you're not sure what that framework is, Hey, let's jump on a call. I'll walk through it with you. Here's another one. The markets always come back, and they do. You know what? Eventually and often. You know what? Time cures a lot of things, but do you have time on your side? Is it on your timeline? Not always. Here's the risks in the markets always come back. What's the opportunity cost? The lost opportunity cost. Where are the liquidity traps? Where's the emotional exhaustion? How about you and how you feel at the end of the day or at the end of the week when you've been fighting that battle? When you have to force decisions, you know what? Recovery isn't always protection. And sometimes it takes a lot longer to come back than you anticipated. Here's one I really like, right? This is one we all believe in too. Just raise the rents. Hey, when you're underwriting, just show a higher rent growth because that'll accelerate the returns. But the math never lies because if you can't achieve those rents, here's the risks, right? Regulatory shifts, tenant instability. Hey, how many of us thought, if we keep this occupied and we keep it occupied at 90%, and we get to keep raising the rents, that we're going to be in cash flow heaven, that we're going to have profitability. You know what? But tenant instability, move out, skips, deaths, these things happen. Political climate change, and I'm not going to get political, but it happens. Community backlash, what looks like margin expansion can become reputational damage or legal exposure even. So make sure that you're looking at this conservatively. And I'm not here to teach you what to do today. I'm just here to make you think a little bit differently. Here's one that comes up a lot. Hey, diversify and you're safe. Listen, I love diversification. For years and years, I really didn't think diversification was a good thing. I always thought, keep your blinders on, look in the same direction because it reduces concentration, right? And when you diversify, it reduces what you're focused on. It doesn't eliminate systematic risk. They talk a lot about diversifying in traditional investments, right? In traditional investments, they say, have money in stocks, have money in bonds, have money in the S&P. You know what? That's good diversification. But today, I believe you should have money in traditional investments. You should have money in alternative investments, real estate, gas and oil. But in that real estate bucket, what about business opportunities? Anytime you buy a multifamily deal, that's a business opportunity. But how about diversification around that? What about having a little diversification in multifamily, maybe some self-storage, maybe even some retail? But take a look at diversification. Owning 5 assets with the same debt structure in the same macro environment isn't diversification. It's repetition. It seems investors lose money in good markets. I've seen portfolios collapse while rents are rising. I've watched people refinance at the top and call it strategy. Most losses don't happen because someone was reckless. They happen because someone misunderstood the environment. Are you paying attention? Are you looking at that? Are you watching the details? And are you listening to people around you? Because they misunderstood confidence for structure, right? You know what? We have to have framework. We have to have structure. Hey, the loudest advice in the room is rarely the safest. Think about that. Write that down. And if you're driving, don't stop to write it down, but write this down. The loudest advice in the room is rarely the safest. What protects investors isn't optimism. It's discipline. And discipline isn't reactive. It's specifically designed. It's designed by the underlying framework, by the strategies you set up. Hey, you might notice something in today's message. You might notice something a little bit different than what I've been talking about over the last few weeks. I'm not explaining how to fix any of this. That's intentional. Because the moment you hear the how to do it, your brain shifts into DIY mode, right? And that's not where I wanted to take you this morning. I wanted to take you to a place where you thought through some of these topics. You start applying fragments of strategy without understanding context. If I give you the fix, and your partial strategy is often worse than no strategy at all. So I'd rather have no strategy and come up with a complete one than to have just a partial one. But risk mitigation isn't a tip, it's architecture. So listen, if you don't understand how the full structure works together, debt, liquidity, equity design, reserves, timing, tax position, optional control, then copying surface advice becomes really dangerous. Execution without structure, that's just gambling, right? You ever go to the craps table and maybe it's your first time you got lucky, but you say, oh, I can go do this again, and you go back. You know what? It's just better vocabulary. That's all. If you want full context, not just tips, not motivation, because you know what? I'm not going to motivate you, but the structural thinking behind why certainty, strategies, framework work in certain environments and fail in others. I'll walk through that in a free live masterclass that I have coming up in March, right? This is where we're going to slow down and look at the architecture behind protection, where we're going to have where we're going to look at how popular advice isn't inherently wrong, but it's rarely complete. You have to have all of it, right? When you have all the information, then you can make right choices, right decisions. So your job is not to chase what's trending. Your job is to chase what's complete. It's to understand what could break down and what to watch for. I wrote a book a few years back called Exit Plan because I always thought, and I've always believed, Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, the second chapter in the book says, begin with the end in mind. We have to think about the future before we take care of today. You know what? And it's so that we understand what could happen along the way, what the framework underlying we have is in place. And I'm going to cover all of this in my March class. So don't miss that. You're going to be able to get registered for that. There'll be a link in the bio. And you know what? I'm going to teach you how to build accordingly. So that's it for this episode. That's a wrap again for this week. The Mic Drop Show, remember, we're here every 7:30 Pacific, 9:30 Central. Understanding any of this is just the first step. Structure, framework is what keeps you safe. I'm going to walk through the full context inside my free live masterclass coming up in March. So watch for details. Thanks for joining me. If I can answer any questions for you, don't hesitate to reach out. You know what? Follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We're always bringing content, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Have a great week, everybody.